Hi, my name is George Coles, and I am an avid retro video game collector.
Do a barrel roll!
I have decided to document my journeys as I grow my collection. Please join me as I share with you my finds. Welcome to Retro Game Treasure Hunting. Hi everybody, and like the opener said, my name is George Coles, and this is another episode of Retro Game Treasure Hunting. On this episode, it's the second of a four-parter, which we talk about my pickups from Flash Games, Comics, and Collectibles for their second-year anniversary sale. I picked up so much stuff that I had to break it up into four parts. And I'm going to put a link down here. Again, check out their Facebook at the very least. Give them some love. Tell them George saying, even if you're not in the Florida area, they do ship. So, all that being said, let's jump right into our first game, Hexen. Now, if you watched the last video, you've seen I also picked up Doom 64. I'm a fan of these games. I was a fan of these games when they came out. The Doom style of game, I really like how they do these first-person shooters, and I really rather enjoyed them. To me, Hexen wasn't just another Doom clone, which there were dozens of at the time. As you can imagine, anytime one franchise gets popular, there's always clones, and there's always people trying to capitalize. This, to me, added some RPG elements, which made it different. It had where you could select between three classes. You had magic. You had stuff you could equip. To me, this was more akin to if Doom and Gauntlet had a child, they would have this game. And the interesting thing that I never knew until I started doing research for this video is Hexen is a follow-up to a game called Heretic that was a PC-only release. Now, again, I'm going to date myself, which I end up doing a lot on these videos. But at the time, PCs were rather expensive, so not everybody had one. It hadn't quite got to the Windows 95 revolution, where Windows 95 pretty much put computers in everybody's home, or at least most of the world's home, and by the time the early 2000s came, we all had personal computers. But this was still in that area where not everybody had a computer quite yet, so I didn't have a computer yet. I didn't have something where I could play Heretic, so I never even knew that the game existed until researching this, which is kind of cool. I kind of want to look for it now, but there's only a PC version. I need to check and see if maybe there's some kind of bundle that bundles it with this, and there's supposed to be a third game, which I couldn't find any information about, other than it was in development, so I'm guessing it got stuck in developmental hell, and when the bottom fell out on these style of games, it just never got released. So, I don't know, maybe if you know about this, point me in a direction where I could find either a console version or something where I could check out the original Heretic. But off of that, let's go into our ratings for this. Now, graphic-wise, I'm going to give this a 3. I think it's right on par with what you would expect from a Nintendo 64 game. It doesn't blow anything out of the water. It doesn't do anything spectacular. It doesn't much expound on the Doom concept. However, it also keeps with the Doom concept, and the level creation and the whole vibe of it I rather enjoy. So it puts it right in the middle of the road to me. Gameplay value, I give it a 4. It's a fun game to play. It's not necessarily one that you're going to go back to over and over again, but it's definitely one that you should probably check out a couple times at least. I enjoy it. I think it's fun. Like I said, I enjoy the fact that they introduce some elements into the genre that weren't previously there. Difficulty, I give it a 3. It's not quite as demanding as Doom 64 is, but you do face some of the same issues. You do face some of the overwhelming horde, where you get waves and waves of bad guys to kill. So there is a little bit of difficulty, a little bit of a learning curve for the controls again. With shooters, you're used to what you use on Call of Duty now and Battlefront, and even if you're playing on a console, if you're playing something like Fortnite, you still have the same basic controllers, which have been the same basic controls since Halo, which is, again, I said in my previous video, the line of demarcation. This was still in an era where they were working it out. Doom and Hexen, both being from the same developer, have similar controls and easiness to pick it up. Replay value, I'm going to give this a 2. I don't see a reason to go back to it often. It is one that you should probably have in your collection. It's a cheap game, so it's worth at least the first playthrough to me, and I think if you like Doom and you haven't checked this out, you should probably do so. Music-wise, I give it a 3. The ambient music is very good. It's not quite as good as Doom. This game feels in a lot of ways like Doom's little brother, and it's hard to keep up to that standard because Doom was such an excellent game. It was a AAA title, but a lot of points it met it. Some parts in here it exceeded Doom. Overall, I give the game a 3. Like I said, if you're a fan of the Doom series, this is a game you should probably own. This is a game you should definitely check out. And if you haven't already, I'm not sure why you haven't. Now, coming up next, a first for the channel. First Super Nintendo game. And our first one is Street Fighter II Turbo Edition, which is one of the many different versions of Street Fighter II has come out. We had Street Fighter Championship Edition, Street Fighter II, Super Street Fighter II. We just had so many different versions of this game. To me, I enjoy the turbo version, the sped up version. It's a fantastic port in the first place of the arcade game. It's really close to what you could play in the arcade at that time. The cool thing also about this, I just mentioned Championship Edition, you could set where you could play, basically Championship Edition is the standard mode, and Turbo is something you put on here. It's really cool that they kind of put both of them on this cart, although it was less than a year on the release from when Championship Edition came out. So for the people that bought that, I think they didn't think it was so cool at the time. One of the most interesting things, and I'm not going to drone on about Street Fighter 2, if you're a video game fan, even if you're not a fan of fighting games, you know the history of Street Fighter 2, so I'm not going to drone on forever. But an interesting tidbit that I don't think a lot of people really know is that the reason why there's a Street Fighter 2 Turbo is there was a hack for the Street Fighter Championship Edition arcade console called the Street Fighter, commonly known as the Street Fighter Rainbow Edition, and the reason it's called that is the Street Fighter logo in the beginning is rainbow. And with that hack, it sped up the original Championship Edition game. It made it faster. And initially, the developers were like, I don't see no interest in it. But then when they started playing Rainbow Edition and went back to Championship Edition, it felt like they were swimming through mud. So they basically learned that, yes, there is a market for this, and there should be some interest in it. Which I just thought was an interesting tidbit, that a hack is what brought us to this amazing game. Now, going into our ratings, graphic-wise, I'm going to give it a 4. It's Street Fighter, you know what to expect. Gameplay, I give it a 5. Again, it's Street Fighter. You know what you're getting into. You know it's one of the best fighting games that's ever been made. Difficulty, I give it a 4. There are some how shall I say, pain in the ass type moments where out of nowhere a character is unstoppable. But once you get the learning curve, once you know the special moves and the different strategies, it becomes a little bit easier. Replay value, I give it a 5. Especially, this is something, again, I've mentioned it on previous videos. If you like the game with your friends, this is one you should get. Everybody's going to remember it. Everybody knows. Everybody has a favorite. So to me, that alone gives it a replay of a 5. Music-wise, I'm going to give it a 3. I think the music is great on the Street Fighter series. Overall, I give this game a 5. To me, the Turbo Edition is the definitive edition for this generation. And before I go into my next game, I'm got a little bit of a sore throat, so I'm going to take just a sip of water here. And the reason that cough actually wasn't part of this, but the reason I bring this up is you see on this cup Bill Goldberg from when I went to WrestleMania 34 in Orlando. He was one of the acts. Taking another drink right here. Now, why do I mention that? Bam. Because as a first, this is our first WCW game, also our first PlayStation 1 game on this series. WCW Mayhem. Alright. I know you guys have seen that I've reviewed a couple bad games. I'm a sucker for bad games, especially bad wrestling games. I don't know what it is. If it's a game that I owned that was bad and I hated it, for some reason when I see it now, I want to buy it still. I don't know why. Maybe it's the sadomasochist in me. Maybe it's the, I don't know, Ed Wood in me. Maybe it's a Mystery Science Theater fan in me. But this is a terrible game. It was the first EA-produced WCW game, and there was high hopes on it. When we got it, there was a terrible, repetitive moveset. Basically, almost every wrestler in the game has the same moveset, save for their finisher. There's bad detection. You could be punching a guy standing right in front of you and not notice that he's been punched and walk right through it. A very forgettable entry into the Pantheon, especially when we had such great games as WCW vs. the World, WCW NWO World Tour, or WCW NWO Revenge that had just recently been put out by WCW. The next game after this became Backstage Assault, which was weird because it didn't even take place in any backstage. That is one innovation on this. It's the first wrestling game to give us some backstage action, which led to the full Backstage Assault game. That actually flopped, which brings us to our interesting tidbit on this game. They were in works for a sequel to this, which kind of got scrapped when WWE bought WCW. Now, what they were working on eventually became Def Jam Vendetta, which was a fantastic game, and I would have liked to see that with a wrestling license, but I love that game for what it is itself. So out of the ashes of this terrible game, a fantastic game was created. Now, coming off of that, let's go into our ratings. Graphic-wise, I give it a 3. The wrestlers, for the most part, look like how they should look. There is a little bit of weirdness to their body shapes, but I kind of accept it because wrestling games at the time, they all had some kind of drawback like that. A lot of them had that look. The Acclaim games, whether it be WWF or ECW, had that problem. Some of the WCW games even had that problem. So to me, I can't really fault them for that. Gameplay wise, I give it a 1 for everything I said, the moveset, the bad detection. It just wasn't fun. Difficulty, I give it a 1. Much like I said on the ECW game I reviewed, you could kick and punch your way to a win on this. Replay value, I give it a 1. Unless you're wanting to unlock all the characters in the game, I have no reason why you should even play this in the first place. I like it, I'm a wrestling fan, so to me, it's a piece of history. I can see there are wrestlers in this game that never got a chance to be on any other game. So to me, that was one of the selling points. And again, like I said, I like terrible games. And this was cheap. It was like $3.99, I think. So I'm going to get $3.99 out of enjoyment out of it. Which reminds me, you can see how dated this was by the Surge advertisement on the inside. That just reminded me of that for some reason, so I had to mention it. Music-wise, I think the music was decent on here. I give the music a 2. Wasn't quite what I would want from a wrestling game, but it's not 100% terrible. Overall, I give the game a 1. No reason to buy this game unless you're a WCW fan or you like bad games, which I guess I fall into both categories, so that's my reason. But WCW Mayhem. Yeah, I own it. Last but not least, we're going to end this one on a higher note. And if you've watched my previous episodes, you know I'm big on this. Another GameCube game. And this one is Star Wars Rogue Leader Rogue Squadron 2. If you've heard, I've mentioned it several times why I'm so big on these, and I don't know why this case doesn't want to stand, but let me just crack it open. The reason being is we're at the time frame where these games are just about to hit that sweet spot where where collectors are really gonna go back and grab them. So I'm trying to get as much of them as I can before the prices jump astronomically. I've seen it happen already, like I mentioned on previous shows, with Genesis, Super Nintendo, NES, Nintendo 64, and we're rolling into the point where we're getting to this era to where the GameCube and the original Xbox and PSP and PlayStation 2 games are going to be collectibles and people want to go back to. So that's why you see me grabbing so many of these GameCube games while they're still relatively cheap. This was actually a GameCube launch title, which I thought was really cool for them to have a launch title and have a Star Wars game as that. It's basically all a flying game. Most of the game you're going to fly in an X-Wing. There are some levels you can unlock where you can fly in the Millennium Falcon or Darth Vader's TIE Fighter, which are both really cool options. The whole game takes place over the course of the original trilogy, so for the fans that love just that trilogy, there's that to it. To me, the Rogue Squadron series are some of the best Star Wars games that ever been put out. I really enjoyed this. This game here I think is really fun. It's a good game to play. I wrote the third one a little bit better than this, but this was what was available. I'm going to get them both. So to me, being a Star Wars fan, there's not a lot of really great Star Wars games out there. There are some. This is one of them. There's Knights of the Old Republic, the original Battlefront games, Force Unleashed is pretty good. Trying to think, probably going to miss a few. Dark Forces, Shadow of the Empire. But for the most part, most of the Star Wars games are bad. And this is one of the reasons why you can't really give up on the whole genre of every Star Wars game, because they do put out some good ones. To me, this is a top tier one. This is one of the probably top 5 or 10 at the very least, in my opinion. With that being said, let's go into our ratings. Graphic-wise, I give this a 4. It looks like Star Wars. It plays like Star Wars. Gameplay, I give it a 5. Like I said, this is what every Star Wars kid fan of the 80s wanted out of a Star Wars game. We all wanted to jump in an X-Wing and fly it. We all wanted to jump into Millennium Falcon. We all wanted to jump in Darth Vader's TIE Fighter and fly around and blow shit up. It's what we wanted to do. Difficulty, I give it a 5. There is some challenge. There is some getting used to. I'm not really good at flying games. It's probably my weakest genre, but for this, I'm willing to go that extra mile because the gameplay is so good. Replay value, I give it a 4. Like I said, if you're a Star Wars fan, and I'm a Star Wars fanatic. As you can see, I have a Darth Vader tattoo right here. Much like going back and watching the movies thousands of times over, I'm going to play this game hundreds of times over. And I think the replay on it, I mean, it's really high. You really enjoy this game. Music-wise, I give it a 4. It has the Star Wars vibe. It has the Star Wars music. And overall, I give it a 4 as well. I think it's a really well-done Star Wars game. It has the vibe and the feel that you want from it. A really, really enjoyable game. And something that I definitely recommend picking up if you're a fan of flying games, if you're a fan of Star Wars, if you're a GameCube collector, I definitely recommend this. With that being said, and this is a weird thing. I don't know what this is. It came in here. Records Entertainment, RGB Records Entertainment Consumables. I assume that this was originally where it was purchased because it was in where the manual is, and that's funny, it just fell out. But I have no idea what that is. I'm guessing it's a store at some point. There's no website on it, so I didn't check it out. But anyway, I digress. So, here are my pickups. Got Star Wars. Got WCW. The wrestling people. Got Street Fighter. And we got Hexen. In a way, they're all sequels, because this is not the first WCW game. So this is a sequel, that's a sequel, that's a sequel, that's a sequel. Just funny how that worked out. I mentioned it on my first of these 4. I picked up 16 things, 15 games, and a console. So I kind of just randomly split them up and just randomly put different things in so I can make 4 different videos. This happened to be like this, so it's just funny how that works out sometimes. I guess this is a sequel-centric episode. With all that being said, I hope this lights a fire for you guys to go and collect some of these old games, get you started or get you going, or recommend some things you haven't seen before or heard of before. But all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of Retro Game Treasure Hunting.